city councilor orientation. That is from our city attorney, Attorney Rob Williamson.
Good evening.
Welcome forward, sir.
I had a PowerPoint presentation, but it's not working.
Okay.
So it's going to be more interactive. So you're going to turn the pages. So.
I came across my little red card just the other day.
That's my wallet. I carry it always.
Right.
All right, this is where I get to talk at you for a while. And I know that several of you have been through this before, but we have some new faces. So this is going to be new for you. And I am going to, I'm a pretty good judge of my audience. So when I see the faces glaze over, I will speed up and get done with it. But I warn you, I can talk about this stuff for hours, but I will not. And so I know at about 90 minutes or so is probably about when things start bouncing off your brain and not sinking in. So we'll shoot for hour and 15, hour and a half to get through this stuff. That's right. But we will get through it. I know last year we didn't even make it through the ethics stuff, but we're going to get through it all. And so I am going to actually skip some of my slides and just summarize them for you. But this is interactive in that you get to follow along the presentation, but you also get to ask me questions. So please, I want to get you the information that you need in order to do this very important job. But I will also say a lot of what I'm doing here for you tonight is to introduce you to subjects, to introduce you to some areas of the law that you should know about, so that you can ask questions, not necessarily so that you know the answers. So it's kind of a red flag. When does the red flag go up and when doesn't it go up? And what we're trying to go through here tonight is to know when you should maybe put the brakes on and ask questions. So, I'm Ross Williamson. I'm your city attorney. I have been with Creswell. I keep forgetting to look back and see when I started. I know my firm, the Local Government Law Group, has been representing Creswell for 15 years at least or so. And I've been working with you all for about 7 or 8. We've been through some good times and some not so good times, but we are in a great time right now, and this is a fabulous group. I really love working with Creswell, and I like it so much that I brought my new colleague, Dan Lawler. He's in the audience right here. He just started with us in December, and he came to us from the University of Oregon, where he graduated from the law school there. And he actually spent the last 6 months with the city of Eugene in their planning department. So he actually has some real planning experience, unlike the legal planning non-experience that I have.
Seems like a fitting last name.
Yes, and it's Lawler too, yes, so that's great. So he's a very welcome addition to our team, and he's serving all of our clients, working with all of our cities, and he will be coming in and helping you all out as well. And so he's here to meet Creswell and to see this presentation live. I can also announce that we have another new attorney that started in January named Jens Schmidt, and he is a litigator. So we've added to our bench that we can serve you with. He has over 30 years of experience with litigation. I actually worked with him at my prior law firm. That's where I learned my litigation experience, was under his tutelage. So he's got all manner of trial court and appellate experience. And so you won't use them at all, because you guys aren't gonna get in any trouble, so there's no need for litigation. So that's not gonna be an issue. So the outline for tonight, I'm gonna talk about some basic government. What is government? What is your role? I'm gonna talk about how a city councilor fits within that system, the decisions you get to make and the choices you get to make, and the burdens you carry on your shoulders. I'm also going to talk a little bit about public meetings and then public records, and then we're going to finish up talking about ethics. And again, ask questions as we go. First slide, on-the-job training. That's funny, I just talked about this with the mayor right before the meeting, but congratulations on being here, and I actually mean that. That's not like a backhanded compliment. This is really, an honor to be here, but it's an honor that comes with a lot of responsibility, and that it doesn't really mesh with the pay you get as volunteers. I know you're all here voluntarily, you're not getting compensated for this work, but you're getting a lot of goodwill and you're helping out your community. So I think you really should be proud of what you're doing here. And just know that Creswell as an entity is a corporation, it's a public corporation, and it has a ton of assets. So it's a really big corporation. So even in a small city like Creswell, the city as an entity is wealthy because you have a lot of assets. You actually, the streets, the sewer pipes, the water lines, the airport, you have a lot of assets, this building. So if you look around town, you are one of the bigger employers in town, and you are one of the bigger holders of assets in town. And so it's a big responsibility, and you are the leaders of that corporation. So as a new counselor and as a returning counselor, I encourage you to learn about your city. And it's not just attending meetings, it's going out and meeting with staff, taking a tour of the treatment plant, taking a tour of the airport, learning what those assets are and seeing how they run. I think it's really important, and I think it's also important to look back on your history. I think it's important to look back on prior budgets, look back on prior goal sessions for the council, see what issues were bubbling up 10 years ago, what they were dealing with, and seeing where you are now. I think it's a good way to judge the trajectory of a city, to look in the past and look where you are now and then see where you want to go. So I encourage you all to take this job seriously and learn as much as you can about it. So Government 101. The city operates within government in the United States in a bunch of overlapping spheres of influence. And you can think about the city as being one sphere, and the county being another sphere, the special districts being another sphere, and some of these spheres overlap, and some of them are totally separate. So as I stand here today in City Hall, I am under the jurisdiction of Lane County, the City of Creswell, Lane Library District, South Lane Fire Rescue, the state of Oregon, federal government. In some cities, I would be a neighbor of a tribe, perhaps. And when I'm in Florence, I'm right next door to the Siuslaw tribe. And so there are all of these different levels of government, and you work within that. And one of the things it's important to know is when it's not in your sphere. And just by example, you can think of just a couple of topics. You think about maybe guns, tobacco, and marijuana. If you look at those three subject areas, you can kind of visualize in your head, okay, what role does the city have in those? Sometimes it's a lot. In Creswell, you actually voted as a city to prohibit marijuana retail in your city. So that was an obligation upon the city. The city council at that time put that question to the voters, and the voters said, no, we don't want marijuana in Creswell. And so that's local city regulation. But as we all know, there's a lot of state regulation of marijuana as well. And there's some preemption at the state level. So there's certain things that only the state can do in regard to marijuana by taxation. There's an option for a local tax, but the majority of the taxation system of marijuana is at the state level. And then we look at the federal level, of course, it's illegal at the federal level. So there's some disconnect sometimes as well. And if you look at tobacco and guns, you have that same kind of interacting spheres. And so one of the important things to know sometimes as a city councilor is, and when you're talking to your constituents and when you're looking at your issues that you have coming up, is sometimes it's not your problem. Or sometimes you don't have the ability to create a solution to the problem. You can always talk to other people in the other spheres, the other levels of government, but sometimes it's just not a city council problem. So relatedly, we go to the next slide and we talk about city council authority. So you look at your different spheres of influence and you figure out whether you actually have, as a city, authority over an issue. And so that's the first question. Do we even have the authority to answer this question, to propose a solution to this problem? And then as a body, you all work together as a body. You aren't individual councilors. So the second question is, do I have the votes? So when we brought up marijuana a couple years ago to this council, I was here and we talked to the council and I said, well, you do have some authority in regards to marijuana. So we can answer that first question. We can say, yes, the council has some authority, and what you can do is you can put this question on the ballot. And then we took a vote. And so if you have a majority of the council that wants to take an action, then that's the will of the body. And then we nice transition to the next slide. And that talks about your authority individually. So you really have no individual authority outside of this body unless you've been given that authority. And you're given that authority sometimes by the charter, sometimes by the municipal code, and then sometimes by a vote of this body. So if you're delegated authority, you're given charges for your committees. So that's delegated authority from this body to that subgroup to then act on those areas. And you can only act in that area if the council is giving you that authority to act. You can't make those decisions on their own. So there's no vote of one. A vote of one doesn't mean anything in this body. Which then transitions to the next slide, which is your roles. And you guys wear a bunch of different hats, and I realize that, but you have to know which hat you're wearing at any given moment, and what authority you have to speak, and what your audience might understand about what you're speaking. So, if you're speaking for the city, on behalf of the city, you should, if you're wearing your city hat, your city councilor hat, you should understand, well, do I have the authority to say what I'm saying here? Do I have the authority to obligate the city here? Do I have the authority to state the city's position? Generally, as an individual councilor, you want to be pretty careful about that. If you're just restating, if there was a vote, let's go back to marijuana. That's easy. We'll run that. So there was a council vote to put marijuana retail prohibition on the ballot. You could take that vote as a city council, and then you could walk out and do an interview with the newspaper and say, well, yeah, as a city council, we decided this should be a vote of the people. We decided that this issue is important enough that we send it to the voters, and we're going to give them their say. You could say that as an individual councilor because you're restating what you just said as a body. If you are out there, if you're campaigning against the measure, which you are allowed to do as an individual, you would want to make sure that you're not wearing your city council hat. You're wearing your individual hat because you are not then stating the city's position, you're stating your individual position. And so these things get a little confusing for your audience, and so you want to make sure that you're clear with your audience what hat you're wearing at any given time, and when you have that authority. And so a great example is a letter to the editor. It's great for you to talk to your constituents, and the newspaper is a great way to do that. But you want to be careful of what you say in those letters and make sure your audience understands what position you're taking and who you're speaking for and on behalf. And so I think it's always great to say in those letters to the editor that you may know me as a city councilor, but this is my personal opinion and I am not speaking on behalf of the city.
I would assume that would apply to just about anything else like social media, blogs, and things like that as well, that
Absolutely, absolutely.
we're gonna state an opinion on Facebook, in the community forum, we need to clear to the city, our opinion, not as a counselor, but as an individual.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that is just a safe way, it's a safe custom and practice to get into, especially if you're the mayor. I mean, once you become mayor, it's hard to see our mayor around town and not think of him as the mayor. So, whenever he's buying coffee, he's making that coffee purchase as the mayor. But no, this is my money, this isn't city money, I'm buying this coffee for me. It's an extreme example, of course. But he's got to be especially careful when he's making statements regarding city business, regarding community business, that, no, this is me talking, this is not the mayor talking, this is not the city talking, this is me as an individual. And so this is what I hope the city will take up, this is what I hope will happen, but I'm not speaking on behalf of the city right now. So he's got to be especially clear. That last bullet point, speaking on union matters, I know you don't have a union here, but it's just a great example. It's from a couple years ago. The city of Lebanon was in some contract negotiations with one of their unions. And if you don't know, union negotiations, you have a negotiating team from the city, and then you have a negotiating team from the union. And there's usually one or two counselors on the city's negotiating team. Everyone knows who they are. It's not a secret. And so there were two people from the Lebanon City Council who were on this negotiating team, and they were charged with saying the city's position on certain matters. Well, there was another counselor who was not one of those two, out in public saying things about the contract, saying things that they wish the city was doing, saying things that they wish the union was doing, saying we should never give them a raise, we should never give them more health insurance, yada, yada, yada. They were out there individually, but it was a little unclear whether they were wearing their city hat or not, and they actually got sued for an unfair labor practice, a ULP. And the Court of Appeals ended up saying, even though that person was not on the city's negotiating team, everyone knew they weren't on the negotiating team, they were speaking, it was hard to tell whether they were speaking on behalf of the city or not, and so that was a labor law violation. So I throw that, I know it doesn't apply to you, but that's just an example of where you can go, you can run afoul of these obligations that you have. Which then transitions to our next slide, which is one of the important obligations that you have as a body is you as an employer. So the city council has a lot of employees, but for the most part, that's Michelle's problem. That's great for us. I mean, because Michelle can handle it. But the city charter says that you appoint Michelle, Judge Palmer, and me as city attorney. So you actually supervise 3 folks here at the city. And so that is that's an employment obligation. For me, for me and Judge Palmer, it's a contract obligation, but for Michelle, it's an employment obligation. And so you are an employer, a supervisor of Michelle. And so all of the employment law issues that come up for employers and employees apply to this body as to Michelle. So though there are some pretty significant issues there, for the most part, we're lucky that the council has pretty much delegated the mayor as kind of the lead role in this relationship, and then the mayor can turn to us as legal counsel and help with that. But it's an important role that you have, and over the last couple of years, Amy has spearhead the relationship building with the city attorney and with the judge, and so you now have a role, a way to better supervise me and the judge. So you're gonna be appraising my conduct and how I do my job. And I'm gonna be getting an evaluation of that. And so I think that's great. And that's how you do your job. That's really standing up and doing this correctly. So this is a very important role, but it's also a very limited role. Again, it's Michelle only. So you don't have supervisory authority over other staff. And that's an important distinction. So you can certainly communicate with staff, get responses to questions from staff, but it's Michelle's role to supervise staff, to discipline staff if it has to happen, and to control staff as a resource. So if you are taking too much of staff time, that's honing in on Michelle's job. She gets to allocate those resources, and that includes allocating resources to the council. And so that you really need to work through Michelle on working with staff. Don't just show up at Public Works and start playing with Cliff's stuff. He doesn't like that, and Michelle wouldn't like that, and that would be outside your role. He's got great tools, but you can't go over there and play. So now that you have this role as a city councilor and you know which hat you're wearing, what happens if the city gets in trouble? What happens if you get in trouble? So that goes to our next slide, which is city versus individual liability. So the best thing here is that city liability is controlled by the Oregon Tort Claims Act at the state level. And that's a statute that sets out how a city can become liable for torts. And it mirrors your insurance coverage. So you have insurance, the city has insurance through city county insurance, and city county insurance covers the city for torts. And that mirrors the Tort Claims Act. So if you are staying within your role, if you're wearing the city council hat and you are doing things properly, you have insurance. You have coverage. So breathe easy. If you get sued, if the city gets sued and you get named, then we call the insurance company and they hire a lawyer and they defend both the city and you. That is limited to staying within your roles and duties as a city councilor. So if, for instance, you put on the wrong hat at the wrong time, or were saying the wrong thing at the wrong time and going outside of your role as a city councilor, you could get into trouble and not be covered by insurance. Yeah. For instance, no one would ever do this, but if you decided that you as an individual councilor could authorize the city to buy a new public works truck, and you said, hey Cliff, go buy that truck, it's okay. Well, you don't have the authority to tell Cliff that. You don't have that budget authority, and you don't have that contract authority. So that was you stepping outside of your bounds. So if the city got sued for that, you would not be covered. So it's good, just stay in your lane and everything's fine. I will also mention that you can be sued in federal court. And in federal court, you can be named individually, but again, CIS will cover you and defend you. So no money out of your pocket as long as you are doing your job and staying within your scope of services and scope of work. Next slide. But there are some ways for you to get into individual trouble. So you signed up to be a city councilor and you're getting no pay at all. But by doing so, you actually have opened yourself up to some new statutory and other ways to get into trouble personally. Yay. But they are very rare, and I just call them out just to hopefully raise the flag if something comes up. So, for instance, we're going to talk about ethics later. If you violate the ethics rules, the Oregon Government Ethics Commission can individually fine you, and you would have to pay that fine out of your own pocket. It's fairly rare, and usually the fines are pretty minimal, as long as you don't do something crazy, like our ex-governor maybe did. Those might be more serious fines. But most of the fines I see these days are, less than $1,000. And often they are $100, and they're kind of a slap on the hand, just do better next time, for most local level violations. I think I will skip talking about the big public meetings case we had in Lane County several years back, but that's another avenue where you can have individual liability. We all remember maybe the Handy case out of Lane County. That case ended with 2 county commissioners paying $20,000 each out of their own pockets. The case was extravagant, the facts were crazy, the violations were immense, so it was just an outlandish case. But it resulted in outlandish, $20,000. That's serious money. And they had to pay that individually. The county did not pick that up, because the county picked up $350,000. So there are some avenues here to personal liability, but these are all extreme cases. Obviously, if you're doing criminal actions, you're get arrested. You're being arrested as an individual, not arrested as a city councilor. We're not going to step in and save you there. And then the last bullet there is acting outside the scope of your duties. We just talked about that. If you're acting outside of your role as a city councilor, you can be held individually liable. Insurance is going to pick it up. Insurance is going to cover you. You'll have to hire your own attorney and pay your own judgment. That is just really rare. You have to be doing bad stuff. All right, we're going to transition to public meetings.